the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out.
Hello, Miami. Thank you so much for watching 305 Sports Now. I am your host, Will. We're doing a little Canes recruiting talk today, and the guest I'm bringing on is a very famous face, as he has been on several networks, like, of course, you know, the You Heard podcast, Locked on Canes, and he is a writer and contributor to Canes Sport and On3 as well. Ladies and gentlemen, none other. To talk a little Canes talk, you know, you recognize his face, guys, and he's now on, for the first time on 305 Sports Now, Mr. Izubee Charles. What's up, Izubee? How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Well, I appreciate you having me on the show today, man. Talk a little bit of Canes.
I appreciate you coming on, man. It was a pleasure meeting you at the spring game. I had a great time meeting you, meeting the guys, and also watching little Canes football.
Yeah, likewise, man. That spring game was awesome. I feel like the spring flew by so fast, and then now we're in the portal, summer workouts, and then fall camp's going to be here before we know it. So everything's moving along pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is, and it's amazing how it's like I feel like the spring portal's been like the Undertaker, if you're familiar with WWE.
Of course.
You know, it's like when people think he's left for dead, he just shoots up and rolls his eyes back and chokeslam the living hell out of his opponent. And I feel like that's what Mario did, you know, these past like 5 days, where it's been back to back transfer portal signings. And today, with the signing of Jacoby Thomas, we were talking about before the show started, he landed a major monster at safety.
Yeah, no, I think Jacoby Thomas is going to be an awesome fit for, you know, what Coach Mario Cristobal, Coach Heatherman is doing. You know, during the spring, Coach Heatherman always preached, you know, I want my defense to be fast and physical. And if you turn on, you know, Jacoby Thomas's tape, that's exactly what he is. Kind of like a rocket from that secondary, you know, playing physical at the line of scrimmage. Great in open field. Obviously, you know, years prior, you know, sometimes Miami's had, you know, trouble tackling guys in open field, things like that. We'll leave that in the past. But with a guy like Jacoby Thomas, who's a veteran presence, played some, you know, SEC ball, was really productive at Middle Tennessee State as well, too. I think he's a guy that can come into Miami and really contribute, you know, next to a guy like Zach Wright-Poser in that secondary. And, you know, it's going to look completely different from last year. I know Current Canes had a lot of struggles in that secondary, whether that be injuries, just lack of bodies. But, you know, Mario Cristobal made it a priority this year to really establish, you know, that back end of that Hurricanes defense. And I'm excited to see what Jacoby Thomas and a lot of those other additions could do, you know, during the fall for the Canes.
No, I totally agree with you. And let me tell you something. We were talking as well. The secondary will not be a weakness this year on this football team. Not only are we packed with talent, but we also have the experience to back it up. So I'm very excited to see what Jacoby brings to the table. And it doesn't matter if you get 1 yard loss or you get 10 yards. The Miami Hurricanes, any running back that runs and meets that young man out in open space in the field is going to be demolished. Okay, so it'll be like a business decision for whoever decides to go up against that young man. He's just a flat out monster, man, a missile coming out of the defensive backfield. But again, Izubee, thank you for coming on. One of the things I have traditionally that I do with first-time guests, okay, again, welcome, your first time here at 305 Sports Now, is I like to hear the origin story, because a lot of times some of you guys come on the shows and you're just like, you know, talking sports, stuff like that, but no one really knows exactly who you are as an individual. And so I want to know, okay, like I told you, you have everybody's dream job. Okay, you talk sports, you write about sports, you know, and how did you get involved in recruiting and covering college football as well with Canes Sport, On3, etc.?
Yeah, so it dates back to my time. I'm originally from Fort Myers, Florida, so on the other coast of the Sunshine State, about 2.5 hours away from Miami. And, you know, growing up, I was a huge, you know, sports fan. I loved journalism. I used to look up to guys like Stuart Scott. I remember in sixth grade, I did kind of a presentation about, you know, somebody you wanted to be like, you know, growing up, you know, Stuart Scott, because, you know, obviously he was a big time ESPN broadcaster back then. Brought a lot of flavor and different, you know, like sayings to the network. And I was like, man, that's somebody, you know, cool that I look up to. So obviously played sports, you know, throughout my youth career, high school career, played football, soccer, and lacrosse. And then, you know, at one point I was like, hey, you know, I don't think I'll be able to play Division I football or play big time football, but I was like, you know, how can I stay involved in this? And, you know, one thing that I always led back to the other was, you know, my love for, you know, waking up early and watching Sports Center as a kid and saying, hey, maybe I can be, you know, on there one day, talk about sports. And, you know, that just led to me kind of taking the journalism route. I attended Florida Gulf Coast University, you know, in my hometown of Fort Myers, you know, major in journalism, minored in communication. And, you know, just throughout my years of, you know, working for, you know, our local news stations or, you know, PBS or anything like that, just kind of, you know, just develop, you know, more love for it and, you know, wanted to concentrate in sports more. And, And I was volunteering at a basketball camp my senior year in college, and in our local news, the Fort Myers News Press came in. They did a story on the camp because we just opened it up, and I was just like, "Hey, man, do you guys have any openings? I'm a senior in college right now. I just want to get my foot in there in journalism." And they're like, "We got a small part-time job as editorial assistant." And I just like, "Hey, any opportunity I can, I'll take it." I sent them some work I did for my class, and they're like, "We can work for that." So the last, I think, 5 or 6 months of my college career, I was just working for USA Today Network, and that was kind of my first dip into the journalism world. And then crazy enough, so I believe a week or so after I graduated college in May, I got a DM from a Kane Sport account, and I had no clue what Kane Sport was or anything like that. I thought it was kind of a joke, and then it was just a message. It was like, "Hey, this is Gary Furman. Call me when you can." And really have to give a shout out to Gary for kind of just finding me in Fort Myers, because it's not a huge market. I was just covering high school, doing high school football games, other high school sports, and he just ended up finding me, gave me a shot. In 2022, I started covering Kane Sport for On3 in July technically. Then my first day was August, and then 3.5 years later, we're here, on the show with you, kind of talking about everything, and been knee deep in Kane's football, basketball, baseball, everything in between. It's been an awesome ride, and I wouldn't change anything for the world.
Well, congratulations, man. You're a nice young man. Like I said, I had a pleasure meeting you at the spring game. We've chatted before a couple times through posts on X, but I mean, I'm very happy for you, and I'm really glad you're living the dream, man, of doing sports broadcasting, sports journalism, etc., and coming on different platforms like this one and other platforms as well, man. So, like I said, you do a great job, and your breakdown, your analysis, and how you cover kids and so on that are coming out of high school as these top recruits is awesome. I will say that. So, I mean, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Okay, so. All right, so thank you so much for that origin story, and now I want to get into recruiting. Okay, now one of the things I want to talk about is the elephant in the room is Jackson Cantwell. Jackson Cantwell. A lot of Canes fans were excited. Crystal ball, it's still crystal ball to go to Miami. We're excited because they thought April 30th was the day that more than likely he was going to put on that Canes hat, but then he shocks the entire world and decides, you know what, I'm gonna visit Georgia and I'm gonna push it to May 13th. I have to say, as a Canes fan, I am concerned. I always felt, even before he pushed the date back, that no matter what you think, Georgia's still Georgia. Georgia has been, you could argue, you could say, the most successful football team, I will say, in the last 5 years, as far as wins and national championships go. Still made the playoff this year, despite it was considered a down year for the Bulldogs. So as someone that covers recruiting, and has, done your homework on this young man, should Miami Hurricanes fans be concerned at the fact that he pushed the date back and Georgia's now seems to be in the mix outside of before it was Oregon, now it's Georgia, the team that we're worrying about?
Yeah, I would 100% be lying if I said no. I do think obviously this is a little bit concerning. Obviously, when a kid has a set commitment date and said, "Hey, I don't need to take any more visits. I've seen everything I wanted to see. I know everything I want to know about each of my programs." And then the first visit that he set up was the visit to Oregon, so that kind of shifted everything. And then once that Oregon visit was said, he's like, "Oh, I'm going to add one more. I'm going to take that visit to Georgia." And funny enough, that was supposed to be the visit that kind of May 9th through the 11th or 12th or 13th. That weekend was supposed to be his official visit to Miami, even before he announced that he was going to move his first commitment date up. So this has been kind of one of those up and down roller coaster recruitments, and I don't think it's going to be over when he announced on April 13th. Just obviously, just the type of player Jackson Cantwell is, kind of a can't miss prospect, the number one prospect in the 2026 class. And obviously, Coach Cristobal, Coach Mirabal are known for kind of being those big guys in the trenches, having those trench monsters, whether that be Francis Mauigoa, Penei Sewell, or just any of the guys that they developed over the years. And Jackson Cantwell is a prospect that they really, really think can come and make a big impact in Coral Gables if he does commit to the Canes. But like you mentioned, a lot of the talks were always Oregon, Miami, but Kirby Smart and those guys aren't going to go away anytime soon. They have the backing of the NIL. They have the, hey, we produce, we win national championships, and now they have that final visit. So that's definitely something to be a little bit concerned about. Obviously, before he announced kind of the shifts and the commitment dates, it was a lot of buzz with Miami. You talk to people down there, they felt really confident about Jackson Cantwell, because he's not one of those recruits that are going to be easily I wouldn't say tampered with, but appealed by the glitz and glamour and the pretty stuff. He's a kid that said, hey, I want to go to a program that I'm going to get developed in, learn under the best coaches, and move me on to that next stage, which is the NFL. And Miami kind of presented that opportunity to him, obviously, with a lot of these guys on the offensive line now leaving. Francis Mauigoa projected to be a first-round draft pick. You can potentially lose all 5 offensive linemen, and Miami kind of, told Cantwell, hey, if you earn it, you can potentially be a day one starter, kind of following that footsteps of Francis Miano. And as we saw, he was a 5-star recruit, came in, started day one, and then now projected to leave after 3 years to be a first-round pick. So that kind of pitch was the main, thing to Jackson Cantwell, come get developed by two of the best offensive line coaches in the country. But other programs do have other things to offer. And, Oregon has a great track and field program. I feel like that's something that isn't mentioned that much in his recruitment too, with both of his parents being Olympians, in track and field, and how big he is in track and field. Oregon has one of the best track and field programs in the country. And then, like we talked about Georgia a little bit, at the end of the day, Georgia, they win a lot, and they send a lot of guys to the league. So this is definitely going to be an interesting recruitment. And, I don't even think Jackson knows where he's going to go. These visits are going to be absolutely massive. If Miami can maybe sneak in another visit, I think that would be absolutely huge. But as of now, it looks like Georgia's going to get that last visit, kind of that last pitch to him, and before he makes that decision. So going to be one we all have to stay tuned in, because if someone tells you they know where he's going, they're absolutely lying to your face too.
So I have a question for you. Piggybacking on something I think I heard you say. On X, he said that I want to do this right and do this once. That's one thing that he didn't mention. But do you think that when May 13th hits, that he's and he selects a school, do you think that school may last all the way leading up to December, or do you think that he could be a potential flip for one of the schools that may have missed out on him?
Yeah, one thing I always say is no commitment is official until the pen hits paper. And you see this with a lot of recruitments, whether it was Jeremiah Smith, he committed to Ohio State at the end of his junior year, and literally the 11th hour, Miami was, in the race. He was getting graphics made to potentially flip to Miami, things like that. And, just with these high level caliber prospects, teams aren't going to stop no matter what. If he says, hey, I'm shutting things down, that's not going to happen. Like, obviously he wants to shut things down, but a team like Miami, a team like Oregon, a team like Georgia, whoever he doesn't pick, they're not just like, oh man, Jack Cantwell said he's shutting things down, we're going to stop recruiting him. He's going to get recruited to the very end, till he facts in his national letter of intent, or whatever it's going to be called after the revenue share thing starts. But this isn't going to be one that's over anytime soon. Obviously, it'll probably be a little bit more behind the scenes, not as publicized as it is right now. But I do think whatever program he does commit to on May 13th, it's going to be a long way to December, and programs are going to still really recruit Jackson Cantwell.
It's very rare. You mentioned Jeremiah Smith. It's very rare, though, because Jeremiah Smith was the number one player in the country during his recruiting cycle. It's very rare. I can't really think lately as an offensive lineman is the number one player in the country. That includes quarterbacks, wide receivers, etc. Despite being known as an O-lineman, also in the country as well, as far as football players go. Let the audience know how good. I mean, I've showed highlights on him before, but how good is Jackson Cantwell exactly?
Yeah, no, he's an amazing prospect. Obviously, like I mentioned, it's all about kind of measurables is one of the biggest things. Young man, you see him walk on the campus. Well, when I saw him walk on the campus, he's like, this kid looks like an NFL player. There's certain kids that just have that look. Jackson Cantwell has that look, and that's something that you can't teach. That's just a God-given gift. And then with both of his parents, being Olympians, he has those athletic traits. And then as a tackle, very, very athletic, has that track and field background, has that grit. Obviously, some people kind of, want to knock him playing in Missouri and Nixon, Missouri, but does play some good competition and tests very, very well. And just a guy that a lot of programs and, a lot of people in the recruiting industry think he can be that guy that comes in and, is that star tackle for you, because we know how expensive, tackles are in the NFL. If you're star left tackle, star right tackle, you're one of the highest paid players on the team. And that's because you have one of the biggest responsibilities on the team. And Jackson has showed, whether that be in camp settings or on film, how good of a player he is. And like I mentioned, the physical tools, those are things you can't teach. And he has all of that, plus having Olympic parents, in your bloodline. I feel like that's the cherry on top of that too. But he's an absolutely awesome prospect. Consensus number one overall tackle. Consensus one of the I think he's only not the number one player on one site, but he's all that he is and more for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very talented player. Again, I've seen the film on him. He's a masher. He's a guy who can protect your quarterback. He's a guy that doesn't fall for tricky defensive plays as well. He can pick up stunts, etc. And even guys that are coming in, last minute blitzes. So we've heard a lot about Jackson Cantwell, but I want to talk about two individuals that if you're a Canes fan and you're deep in recruiting, you have heard of them. But I think much of the general audience has not heard of these guys. I'm gonna start first with wide receiver standout out of St. Augustine, Samarian Wingo. Samarian Wingo is listed at 6'2", 180 pounds. He's considered the 23rd best wide receiver according to 247 Sports in the country. Watching him on film, is if I was to say one phrase or one word is playmaker. This kid is an absolute playmaker. I mean, if you put this young man one-on-one in the boundary with any corner, especially if they're shorter than him, he's gonna win those battles. Can you describe to the audience how good this young man is as far as who he is? And if you want, where do you think he might land as far as the school goes?
Yeah, so I'll start with him as a player. Funny enough, when obviously the 2026 cycle is a big thing now, but I believe it was about a year, almost 2 years ago, I was at one of the camps, just picking the brain of some of the coaches and just saying, hey, who's a wide receiver in that 2026 class that you really like? I think this was the summer heading into last year or a year and a half or whatever it may be. And one guy they kept mentioning was Samarian Wingo. This is when he wasn't really a big time prospect, but they're like that young man and say obviously he can really ball out. And after hearing that from the coaching staff, seeing or hearing the great things they said about him, did the same thing. Watched his tape, was really impressed. And then this past year he came down to play American Heritage and Malachi Tony in the state semifinal. Just watching him against those Heritage DBs, had a big time touchdown. Took the top off of a defense that's really really good in American Heritage. And he's just the type of guy that you mentioned. If you put him one-on-one with the cornerback, he's gonna make them look silly. And had the chance to watch him in 7-on-7 in Atlanta as well too. And he's just a dynamic wide receiver. The Canes absolutely love him. He's a good blend between size and speed. Obviously, he's not the biggest wide receiver, he's not the fastest wide receiver, but he can definitely move, and he definitely has that jumping capability, those ball skills to go up top and make a cornerback look silly. And as far as his recruitment, I think Miami was in the thick of things earlier in the year. It was kind of a Florida Miami battle. Florida State kind of fell off. Now it's Miami, Florida, Alabama, and South Carolina. And this past spring he spent I think 4 or 5 days in Miami and Coral Gables during the spring practice, and then came back and spent another 2 days after the spring game. So Miami's really in the mix with him right now, and I think they're, if not the top school, probably 1A or 1B in his recruitment. Obviously, I feel like the official visits are going to play a huge role into his final decision. Right now, I would say I'm leaning towards Miami. I say they'd be the favorite in his recruitment because one thing that he did mention that is pretty interesting that you don't hear a lot of recruits say is obviously he has a great relationship with Coach Kevin Beard, but he has an awesome relationship with Coach Shannon Dawson, called Shannon Dawson, one of his favorite offensive coordinators, and mentioned how dynamic the wide receivers in the Canes offense are. Obviously, we saw last year with guys like Xavier Sharpo, Jacoby George, Isaiah Horton, but Samarian himself told me, he's like, listen, I saw what he did with a guy like Tank Dell in Houston that is playing for the Texans right now. That's a lot of kids nowadays love Tank Dell and always call him one of their favorite receivers. And took it back even further. He mentioned Tavon Austin, Stephen Bailey, what he did at West Virginia. So this is a kid that has really done his homework on not only Kevin Beard but Shannon Dawson, and said how big of a role he's playing in his recruitment. So just hearing little things like that makes you think, okay, this kid's really invested in this program, not just the base stuff, the normal fluff stuff that you see, but the nitty gritty stuff of this program. So right now, I know it's a long time before signing day, like I mentioned, but right now I really do think Miami's in a good spot with Samarian Wingo for sure.
Do you think that he'll commit anytime soon, or is he gonna be a December guy?
I think it'll happen before his senior year, so maybe an August type of guy. He said he wants to take those OVs, kind of figure things out, and then just have his team locked in before his senior year and just play senior year, not worried about taking those visits and all that good stuff. But like I said, with these high profile players, it's not done until pen hits paper in December and they fax in their letters of intent. But he's a guy that he's made it clear he wants to kind of get it out the way before his senior year starts.
Well, think about Shannon Dawson and like his first year, because the Tyler Van Dyke had issues, as far as throwing some interceptions that some of the fans were skeptical because we weren't throwing tight ends and it was a play calling, whatever case it be. A lot of guys respect Shannon Dawson big time, and a lot of respected coaches as well. Like I've interviewed Hal Mummy, who's the founder of the Air Raid offense. He loves Shannon Dawson, Dana Holgerson as well, Geno Smith as well, Tavon Austin, whom you mentioned, is actually a big fan of Shannon Dawson. So I'm really glad to hear that it's not just a Kevin Beard thing, with a lot of the receivers. They also like the offense and they also like talking, and the teacher that Coach Dawson really is. So I'm really glad to hear that. The young man I'm going to talk about right now is, to me, he's my favorite recruit in the 2026 cycle because this guy is just unique. Okay. He is from the state of Georgia. The state of Georgia does produce a lot of good football players. The Miami Hurricanes love targeting that state as well in recruitment. Listen up, guys. His name is Hez Kent. They call him Superman Kent. He is 6'5", 300 pounds. but he runs like a 4.7 40. If you watch him on game film, he is absolutely electric. Okay, he's listed as the 12th best tackle in the country. However, he wants to be a tight end, and Miami's recruiting him as a tight end. Izubee, what can you tell us about Hez Kent?
Yeah, I think he might be bigger than 6'5". I think he might be closer to 6'6" or 6'7". And the kid's an absolute freak show. You know, before we got on the air, you brought up a great comparison. You're like, he's kind of like an Elijah Lofton type of guy that, you know, does everything. I feel like they're the same type of player, but Elijah Lofton's like 6'2" and Hez Kent's like 6'7". So we're both super dynamic guys that have played, you know, multiple positions on offense and, you know, shining. You know, one thing that stands out about Hez Kent is when you talk to Miami staff and guys are on that program, they mention his basketball background. One of the coaches actually went up to one of his games in Georgia and said, you know, he was on a pick and roll. He rolls off the screen, catches a pass and just slams it home. And, you know, for a guy that big to be, you know, moving that, you know, well on a basketball court, you know, slam dunking things, the coach, like, he just made himself a lot of money, you know, with that small thing. And that's just, you know, one of the things that Miami really likes about him. Just, you know, how you mentioned some people list him as a tackle, some people list him as a tight end. Obviously, he wants to play tight end, but Miami thinks he can be an absolute mauler, kind of a 6 offensive lineman. If you line him up in line and then you can flex him out wide, he can, you know, be that ace back, just a really dynamic player like Miami got in Elijah Lofton. And, you know, those guys are super high on him. He's a guy that I'm high on. I saw him camp at Miami last summer. It's just weird seeing a guy that big move that smooth, and it's just like, isn't this guy supposed to be working with the big boys? What is he doing? You know, catching passes, you know, from the quarterback right now. But a very dynamic and unique player, and just, you know, guy that we see Miami just wants massive body types and guys that can move and, you know, move people. And Hez Kent kind of fits that description really well. Kind of reminds me of a Darnell Washington type of guy. Obviously, Darnell was a little bit, you know, on the slimmer side, but I think Hez Kent, Miami's plan is if he gets into the program, slim him down a little bit, but, you know, kind of still use that power and advantage and, you know, make that finesse a little bit more smooth and all that stuff. But he's a really unique prospect that I think Miami really likes in that 2026 class.
Yeah. Funny thing about Hez Kent, if you want to be entertained watching film, watch him. He's lined up at the boundary. He's 300 pounds, and he makes the cornerbacks look really small, and they don't want to tackle him, right, at all. You know, when they're one-on-one with him, he's dangerous in the red zone as well. He catches deep balls as well. I saw him catch a few screens as well. Even they even put him in the slot. I mean, that squad's really used Hez Kent in a variety. Wildcat, I mean, you name it, he's done it. And that's the one thing about Hez Kent that I really like and I really do enjoy as well. Izubee, we have a little bit more time, so I want you to get into this. You mentioned in reference to Jackson Cantwell about the whole idea of revenue sharing. That's something we've been hearing about in a lot of podcasting circles. Like, how is that going to work as far as the revenue sharing system goes in college football? I think it's going to start next year. Am I correct?
I believe it comes in effect either maybe in July, even as soon as July.
Okay.
That is something pretty much what it's kind of going to be like. Long story short, it's kind of like a salary cap for you know, college programs, because right now NIL is the most out of control. Like, how I describe it is just the wild west. There's so many different backdoor things, agents doing this, players doing that, handlers doing that. So that's kind of an effort to kind of, you know, not control that, but make it a little bit more controlled, if you know what I mean. Not, you know, just different people doing different things, and it's going to come directly from the school. But, you know, a lot of people, I still am not 100% informed on, you know, how that's going to work and different things like that. So it's still kind of a process of, you know, when it starts, we'll start learning more how it works and, you know, different things like that. But the easiest way I can put it is it's kind of like a salary cap. Obviously, the NFL has a salary cap, the NBA has a salary cap, but a salary cap for college football, just because, you know, there's so much money being invested into these college programs, not only football, but basketball. We see, you know, guys making $2, $3, $4 million, you know, on the basketball court, and, you know, there's a bunch of stuff going on. So kind of the NCAA's effort to kind of, you know, reining this stuff in and kind of getting a little bit of control of it.
Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for explaining that. Izubee, thank you very much. As we talked about, you know, Jackson Cantwell, we've mentioned, we went over two of the guys as well that may have not been, you know, spoken about much at the podcasting circles, Samarian Wingo and also Hez Kent. But where can we find you as far as social media handles go, or any YouTube channels that you may want to plug?
Yeah, so my Twitter is my name @Izubee Charles, and then on Instagram we're under the handle Kane Sports. So on that, we post, you know, a lot of the players, the high school players will go out to their practice, post highlights of them, and then Twitter, CaneSport is where you can find my articles, canesport.com. And then if you're on TikTok too, we post, a lot of coach interviews, players interviews, and, different cool things on TikTok as well at CaneSport. So my Twitter, at Izubee Charles, and everything else at CaneSport to find all our content.
Well, thank you very much, Isubi. Thank you for coming on. If you like this interview, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to subscribe and don't forget to follow Isubi in every single one of his social media handles. But if you like this interview, if you like what you heard, please also do not forget to like, share, and subscribe here to 305 Sports Now for Izubee Charles. Once again, my name is Will. Have a great day. God bless. See you soon. Go Canes. Bye-bye, guys.